Is Julie Millsap, and I am the Communications Director at Campaign for Uyghurs. We are incredibly honored to be hosting this panel today on Human Rights Day, which is the perfect time to call attention again to a very important and sobering anniversary. The 12th will mark 3 years since the disappearance of renowned Uyghur scholar Rahile Dawut, and we are very honored to be joined here today by her daughter, Akida. We are also joined today by Rian Thum, Senior Research Fellow at the University of Nottingham, and we will hear remarks from Uyghurs who are also dealing with a situation that any human being should never have to deal with. Ziba, Murat, and Jewlan Shirmemet will share with us about their missing Uyghur mothers and the torment that this situation has brought them. Beginning our remarks today, I'm very pleased to introduce Rian Thum to speak on Rahile and the overall situation of Uyghur scholars under CCP oppression. Ryan's book, The Sacred Routes of Uyghur History, is one of the most informative and authoritative resources on the topic, and we are very honored to have him here to share with us today from both his professional and personal perspective. Ryan, thank you so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for including me. You know, it's a great honor to be able to make some small contribution to spreading awareness about Rahile's case, as well as the case of all the other Uyghur scholars, intellectuals, and artists who've been disappeared, and of course the great mass of ordinary people, farmers, shopkeepers, etc., who have been taken into internment camps, prisons, et cetera, et cetera. This is a particularly difficult topic for me because I work very much in the same field with Professor Rahile, and she was influential in my own scholarly development. I consider her a teacher of mine, although I've never I never had the luxury of taking a class with her. I think I'll start from the broadest part of this topic, and then let it get narrower through the course of my remarks, ending with some reflections on my personal interactions with Rahile Muallim. So her disappearance is part of a much larger pattern of imprisonment of cultural figures. We have hundreds of intellectuals who have disappeared, but I also think this is quite closely connected to the disappearance of artistic leaders, including, for example, the most famous Uyghur comedian, famous musicians, etc. And we can see this in a few examples that I'll lay out here. One, I think that's most relevant to Rahile's case is the purging of Xinjiang University. Now, Xinjiang University is the most prestigious educational institution in the Uyghur region. It is the place that Uyghurs aspire to go to. It was, until recently, the greatest concentration on the planet of experts in Uyghur literature, Uyghur history, Uyghur arts, Uyghur anthropology. Now, I say until recently because around 2017, there was a purge at the university. And if you just, for example, at the Renwen which is the humanities institute at Xinjiang University, you can see the effects of that. If you go to the webpage of Xinjiang University's Humanities Institute and look at the faculty listing, there is now not even one Uyghur faculty member on that in that institution. So the Xinjiang University's staff has changed dramatically as people have been swept up, and the people who have left those faculty lists are by and large disappeared, either in many cases not clear where to, either to the internment camps, which are sort of indoctrination, extra-legal indoctrination camps, or to prisons. We know a lot of intellectuals were given formal prison sentences with charges, which is a bit different from the larger numbers of people outside these sort of elite cultural reproduction institutions. The president of Xinjiang University was also taken in during this purge, and he was given Pulat was given a death sentence. This is not limited to Xinjiang University. At Xinjiang Normal University, the extremely famous poet and professor of literature, abducted Jalaluddin, was arrested, and he recently has been heard from in a way. He apparently has composed a poem from whatever prison or internment camp he's in, and his fellow inmates memorized this poem he composed and passed it on by word of mouth, each link in the chain memorizing the poem. And that poem has now gotten out into the Uyghur community and was recently published in the New York Times. I think this is a good reminder of the fact, obvious as it may seem, that these folks are still there in the prisons, living their lives, and in some cases practicing their arts and thinking about their professions. And this was for me, a kind of a moment of hope to have this poem reemerge, and made me think again about colleagues and all these people who are still there. I should move a little faster. We also have Yalkun Rozi, very famous author and scholar of literature, who was given a life sentence for his role in producing Uyghur textbooks for schools. These are textbooks that were in use for a decade, and the party then went back and did an examination and decided that, oh, so many years ago when these were written, that Yalkun Rozi had overseen a project that had not enough appearances of the word China, too many citations of Uyghur literature, so very minor things like this, and that these were indications that he was disloyal to the party, and he has a life sentence based on producing those textbooks. Abdurrahim Hayt, also known as the Dutar King. The Dutar is a Uyghur instrument, was disappeared, placed in an internment camp. Other singers, I already mentioned the comedian Ablajan, sometimes called the Uyghur Justin Bieber, has been disappeared. So all of this shows a wide policy of imprisoning and disappearing the most important describers of Uyghur culture, researchers of Uyghur culture, practitioners of Uyghur cultures, and sort of humanistic thought leaders among the Uyghurs in general. And it's really hard to think of a prominent Uyghur intellectual who has not disappeared. So what is this all about? Well, I think there are three places I'll mention that we can look to understand some of this. One is just to look at the wider set of policies that are being imposed on Uyghurs at the moment, which is someone speaking to me? I can hear some other audio here. Okay, that seems to have disappeared now. There are a whole other set of policies which show that the intent behind this really is about eliminating Uyghur culture, or at least weakening it and re-engineering that. The most prominent of these are the burning of books, the removal of books from bookstore shelves, the restrictions on use of Uyghur language in elementary school education. It's almost entirely purged from elementary school education. It's all happening in the Chinese language now, and the separation of Uyghur children from their parents, especially those who have had at least one parent put into an internment camp, have often been put in residential schools where they're more or less raised as Han Chinese children. So all of this, and I should add the restriction on religious practices, many of which are intertwined with non-religious activities such as historical commemoration, gathering for festivals, things like this. I mean, there are even regulations on how a private wedding must occur, what kind of people can be there, what kind of music has to be played, etc. So there is these disappearances are part of a much larger project to interfere in and really diminish and destroy Uyghur culture as it exists today. The other place I wanted to look for understanding some of what's happening with this are the ways that the leaders in the party talk about the disappearance of these intellectuals or the imprisonment of these intellectuals. And the two charges that we see coming up most frequently are the charge of being a two-faced official and the charge of what they call separatism, or what would more normally be called in English advocacy for independence. So I think the mechanics of these two terms give us some insights into what is going on. First, let's look at the two-faced official. What is a two-faced official? This is someone who outwardly speaks in favor of the Communist Party of China, who follows all the rules, who acts in ways that seem to support the Communist Party of China, but secretly has undisclosed disloyalty to the party and ulterior motives. Well, you may ask, if their words show support for the party and their actions show support for the party, then how do you even find one of these supposed two-faced officials? And the answer is that the party has to look very closely and sort of read tea leaves and make very fine distinctions in how people have phrased things in their writings. And it ends up being quite an unfair process. And ultimately, it is a recognition that there is no place for Uyghurs in the system that is set up by the Communist Party of China. Certainly no place for Uyghurs in positions of power or leadership, because even when they follow the rules and when they say the right things, they can be framed as, and will be framed as, a danger. Now, still, you might ask, well, there has to be some practical way of deciding this. And one of them is that if an individual has shown too much in Uyghur culture, that is seen as an investment in Uyghur identity. So, for example, if you're an anthropologist like Rahile and you are documenting Uyghur culture, that is seen as an excess of interest in Uyghur culture, as opposed to, and therefore a deficit of interest in the wider Chinese nation. And what this means is that essentially an interest in Uyghur culture, or the performance of Uyghur culture, if you're a musician, becomes criminalized. And we can see that again in this idea of separatism, which is often the formal charge that people were given in those cases where they're actually given prison sentences. What is separatism? How is it expressed? According to the Chinese law, separatism is a crime that, well, this is a crime that's not illegal in most democracies. It merely means, in the Chinese case, expressing sympathy or interest in independence or even autonomy. So, for example, if I, as an American, were to say right now, and this is something I do believe that Puerto Rico should have the right to determine that its population have the right to determine that they would like to be separate from the U.S. and independent. That would be illegal. If this were China, that would be illegal, and I would go to prison for that. But these intellectuals are not saying anything along those lines. They're not actually being put away for saying things like that. Instead, the government has recognized that they successfully have terrorized Uyghurs into avoiding all political discussion, certainly into avoiding talking about an independent state. Those Uyghurs who are interested in it would never speak of it in a public way in the Uyghur homeland. And so they look for other signs. And once again, those signs are expression of interest in Uyghur culture, support for Uyghur traditional culture, and especially anything that engages with the idea of Uyghurs as having a connection to Turkic culture in general. And in fact, the government has now promoted and factually false, according to all scholars outside of China, have no real connection to other Turkic groups. This means that anyone in the humanities, any Uyghur in the humanities, for example, Rahile, or especially historians who want to speak factually about the Uyghurs' relationship to other peoples who live around them, it necessarily committing a crime by advocating the knowledge of Turkic connections. So to sum up this sort of broader perspective, this is really a campaign that has made Uyghur cultural practice and documentation dangerous and de facto criminal. Now I want to talk a little bit about Rahile in particular. Rahile is extremely famous in the Uyghur homeland. She is also the most well-known Uyghur academic among scholars outside, among foreigner scholars like me, who are outside, living and working outside of China. She was widely praised by the government until very recently. She won all kinds of prizes, all kinds of grants. She was on the cover of Xinjiang Women's Magazine. So she was someone that the Chinese government was very proud of, and she, until they made this turn and decided that she is a criminal. Her work is quite influential, extremely influential for me. A lot of what some of her most widely cited work is her study of Uyghur shrines, holy places that Uyghurs make pilgrimage to. This involved an incredible amount of on-the-ground work. She charted all of the important holy places of the Uyghur region by going to them in person, and eventually created a kind of guidebook, handbook, first a dissertation that was detailed, and then in the Chinese language, and then a Uyghur version, which was more for popular consumption. And when I began my own research on Uyghur holy places and holy sites, one of the first things I did was read through Rahile's book, and someone told me, to my surprise, that well, she lives, I was in Urumqi, she lives in town, you can go see her. And so I very nervously called her up, and she said, please come over, I'll make you polo. And I don't know if Akida remembers my visit when we had polo at the house, but Akida was there, and she was incredibly generous with me. I knew very little. My starting point was very basic. I had read her book, that was visited a few shrines, and she was extremely generous in sort of getting me up to speed on the basics. And for the next decade, I really relied on that book to go around to the shrines and do the kinds of research I was interested in. So, for example, the very opening passage in my own book is the story of a particular shrine of Siawushala, and that was a place I found because of her book. And when I got there, the sheikh, the guy in charge of the shrine, said, there was a lovely young woman here who came by. You really should talk to her. She was widely known, not just among foreign scholars and the Chinese officials who promoted her work, but she's also still very, very widely known among the religious officials who these sites. And her book is quite popular. I mean, now it's not available. I'm sure it's banned, but the book is so popular that you could find pirated editions in places like Yarkand, very rural places. You could find people unable to get enough copies through the normal distribution channels and making pirated editions. So her impact has been immense, both on scholars abroad and scholars inside Xinjiang, but also among the more rural people that she interacts with. And it's a testimony to how enterprising she is, how well she was able to use the systems that the Chinese government had set up. You know, until very recently, the official policy and the practical actions of the Chinese state were very supportive of development of individual ethnic groups' culture. And this is one of that's changed now, as I've discussed. Promoting your own non-Han Chinese culture is quite dangerous. But I think that's one of the things that made this so shocking, was that the reason Rahila could do the work she did was because she had the support of the Chinese government. And then it sort of turned on a dime around 2016, 2017, and all of the things that had been paying her and promoting her to do suddenly became retroactively dangerous. And from all the reports we've gotten, there were these investigations that went back through scholars' previous work and dug up things to use to accuse them of separatism. And the end result is that this very generous, brilliant woman is now behind bars somewhere for no good reason. She has no history of political activity. Not that that should be illegal, but it essentially is for Uyghurs in China. No history of political activity or political advocacy. All she did was to document and preserve Uyghur culture, particularly rural Uyghur culture, which doesn't get enough research and coverage among scholars anywhere. And so it's a great tragedy, and I'm grateful that you all have come to listen to this. And now I'd like to turn it over to the people who are really suffering and dealing with this issue.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for those very informative remarks. I am now honored to introduce our very brave friend, Akida Pulat. Since her mother's forced disappearance in 2017, Akida has been thrust into a role she never could have imagined for herself, that of advocate for her mother. Her mother, renowned Uyghur scholar Rahile Dawut, who we were just speaking of, and who this panel is being held up in honor of today, is highly regarded among her colleagues worldwide, as Ryan just spoke to. Professor Dawut taught at Xinjiang University and has been known as one who was dedicated to her students and to her subjects. She was a custodian of Uyghur history and culture, as we've just heard. And for any of those who are seeking the truth about the Chinese regime's true intention towards the Uyghur people, we need only look at her case. There is so much that could be said about her, and in the 3 years since her government enforced disappearance while on a work trip to Beijing, we have heard many people share. But today, we want to hear from the person to whom she mattered most, her daughter, Akida Pulat. Akida, please share with us about your mother.
Thank you so much for all of you attending this webinar today. Thank you so much for all of you listening to our story. My name is Akida Pulat. I am a grassroots human rights activist fighting for the release of my mother, Rahile Dawut. 5 years ago, I came to the United States as a simple international student. I never attended any political event. I never spoke on political issue. But now, because of the tragedy happens to my family and happens to my people, I became a human rights activist, dedicating all of my time and energy to fight for the release of my mother. So, as like the people joining the webinar today might already have heard about Uyghur and what happens to us. Today, I would like to speak as a daughter's perspective about how the persecutions happens to our family and what it is like to be an Uyghur living abroad. As you already know, Uyghur are massively detained and imprisoned in their homeland, and my mother is among one of them. My mother, Rahile Dawut, is a world-renowned scholar of Uyghur study and a professor at Xinjiang University, who has been detained by the Chinese government since December 12, 2017. Today, I would like to share my mother's story. I would like to share the Uyghur tragedy, how the detentions of my mother changed my life, and what you can do to help us. I still remember vividly in 2019, sorry about that. I still remember vividly in 1998, my mother finished her PhD in Beijing Normal University. Because she was among a few Uyghur female at that time who get their PhD degree, our entire family was proud of her. Me and my dad spent 3 days in the train, went all the way to Beijing to attend her graduation ceremony. She was surrounded by her Chinese friends. All of her Chinese friends, like my mother, didn't want to say goodbye to her. She has Chinese mentors, and her mentors really like my mother. After she finished her PhDs in Beijing and went back to her homeland, she started to teach in the Xinjiang University. She achieved many success in her field. She is also a visiting scholar at such institutions as the University of Pennsylvania, Indiana University, the University of California, Berkeley. She has received many awards from China's Ministry of Cultures, and she founded a folklore institute and shared her work in Europe and the United States, becoming a guide to many foreign scholars. If you ask how hardworking your mother is, I am the witness. She woke up at 3 a.m. in the morning because she wanted to prepare for her class next day. She spent all day in her office building doing research. When I was in high school, I spent a weekend with my mother. She was doing her research and I was doing my homework. When we left the office building, the security looked at us with a smile on his face and said to my mother, "Again, you are the last ones leaving the office today." Entire building know how hardworking my mother is. From this point, you might imagine my mother as a hardworking workaholic, but she is more than that. She has great personality and she is such a lovely person. To my family, she is an amazing mother, a lovely wife, and a caring daughter. Despite her busy schedule, she spared time to cook delicious food for me and my father. Despite her busy schedule, she went to my grandparents' house every day to check if they are okay. Despite her busy schedule, she organized the family gathering or friends gatherings every week and told us we should cherish each other. My mother never involved in any politic or illegal activity. She was so busy with academic, her research, her family, and never had time to think about political issue. She has devoted all of her times to being a good mom, a good wife, and a good daughter. She told me many times that we should be cautious and stay away from politics because it is so risky, especially for an Uyghurs to get involved in any political discussion. She always followed the government guidelines and told everyone that we should we should follow the law. My mother is a scholar, not a criminal. She studied the folklore and cultural traditions of minority people. She promotes the culture and history of her people. She has been doing research within the strict confines of censorship imposed by the Chinese government. But starting from 2017, my mother and more than 100 other Uyghur intellectuals became the target of massive detentions and imprisonment. Chinese government has been denying that they are doing genocide to Uyghur, but for me, it is a genocide. It is a genocide for those who lost freedom for several years in concentration camp. It is a genocide for people who lost contact with their family member. It is a genocide for me suffering from not being able to see my mother. It is a genocide for all of the Uyghur that is a genocide for all of the Uyghur that is affected by this issue. If you ask me how my mother's detentions affected my life, it changed my life totally. In the past, I used to talk to my mothers over the WeChat every day. I shared every tiny single things in my life. But since 2017, December 12, I lost contact with my mother. I lost the emotional support. Many good people told me, if you wanted to talk, you can reach out to me. But if you have an excellent parent, you will know that your mother is the only person that you can bother anytime if you wanted to talk. I lost that emotional connections. I'm not the only one who lost these emotional connections. I believe that other speakers today also lost this kind of emotional support. The second change in my life is I used to imagine my future life is happy and simple. I used to think that after I finish my study in the United States, I would go back to my homeland, stay with my parents, and have a simple life in my homeland. But now, because of what's happening in my homeland, because the situations is not getting better, because it's no longer a safe place for us to return. I can't imagine when I can go back to my homeland again. I have to start a life in a foreign country alone. The third change in my life is I graduated from a technical major in business school. The people in my profession, how they spend their day is they will go to office, work from 8 to 5, focusing on analyzing the business problems or data, and go back to homes, have a rest. A day is over. But while my peer is working on their field, getting promotions and achieving success in their field, I devoted all of my time and energy, seize every opportunity to speak up for my mother. But I don't regret, because I know my situation is much better than millions of Uyghur that are in concentration camp. At least I have the freedom to speak. At least no one forced me to eat pork. At least I can go wherever I want. At least no one tortured me mentally and physically. And one of the good things is in the futures, if I think about today, I won't regret of doing nothing to my family and to my people. This tragedy also make me become stronger and have more determination to fight with the injustice posted by the Chinese government. I have shared my tragedy and my people's tragedy, but now is 21st century. I believe with the determinations of us and with the help of the people all around the world, the situations would change. From my experiences, from what I know there are several things you can do to help Uyghur. The first things you can do to help Uyghur is share the testimony. When you see a Uyghur share their testimony saying their family members are being detained, Please share on your network. Please share it on your Twitter or Facebook. Your friends would see, your family member would see. More and more people would know what's happening to us. And when you see a petition online regarding to the Uyghur issue, please sign the petition. Each actions count. And you can also write to your political representatives and inform them about what is going on Uyghur and urge them to take action. I really wanted to see my mother again. Several weeks ago, my mother received the Curious to Think award from the Scholar at Risk. I received the award on behalf of my mother. I am proud that my mother received this award. Her hard work paid off. But I also feel sad because my mother, she doesn't know she received an award. I cannot say congratulations to my mother. Please help me to achieve my goal. Please help me to see my mother again. Here are a few things that you can help me in this process. After I became an activist, I used the social media as my weapons to raise awareness. I posted the testimony and the news updates about my mother's every day on my Twitters. If you can see on this screen, sorry if it is not clear, but my Twitter's name is Akida Pulat and the hashtags AKIDAP. Please follow me on Twitters and share my testimony. And also, we are going to do a 3 years remark of my mother disappearances campaigns on this Saturday. To make it clear for all of the audience, all of the peoples about the action item you can do to help my mother, I create a website many years ago called freemymoms.org. Please go to this website and you can see all of the actions you can do to help my mother. It is called freemymom.org. Please help me to see my mother again. Please help Ziba to see her mother again. Please help Jewlan to see his mother again. Please help us. Please help Uyghur. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akida, for sharing. That was very powerful.
Thank you.
Akida's memories and remarks remind us of how devastating the human cost of these atrocities truly are. And Akida, as she mentioned, is not alone in experiencing this kind of pain. We will now hear from Jewlan Shirmemet, who will share with us about his fight to free his mother.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance for speak out for my mother. My name is Jewlan Shirmemet, son of hero mother, Surya Tursun. She is my mother. I'm living in Istanbul for more than 9 years. I came to Istanbul in 2011 for study, then enrolled at Istanbul Commonwealth University in 2012. Then I have graduated from Istanbul Commonwealth University Law Faculty in 2018. During my study in 2013, my mother came to Turkey to visiting me. She came to Turkey with a Chinese tour group. Actually, the Chinese government supporting company, tourism company. With that company tour group came to Turkey, came to Istanbul for visiting me and my school and visiting Turkey, and actually it's my environment at here. And as a mother, this is her right, and as a son, this is my right. After the 5 years, Chinese government detained my old family member, my mother and my father, my brother, in 2018, just because of I'm studying in Turkey. Then my 2019 December, my father and brother were released, and my mother sentenced to prison camps just because of she came to Turkey. All prison in the 2013. At that time, our visiting program is lawful and legally, but this is why my mother came to Turkey. That's why she was detained to the concentration camps. Actually, I have lost in touch with my family in 2018. In 2018 January is my last contacting with my family, and then my whole family member and my all relative friends were deleted me from the WeChat program, because that time we just contacting on the WeChat. They deleted me. Then I'm not able to contacting with them, and I'm not daring to contacting with them because if I contacting with them maybe will get in trouble for them, so I'm not daring to contacting with them. But after the 2 years in 2019 December, the news come to me. It told me all my family members were detained, and just because I'm studying in Turkey, and my mother is still in the prison camps just because she came to Turkey to visit me. That's why. That's simple. The reason is that simple. I'm studying in Turkey, and my mother come to Turkey to visit me. Every time when I thinking my mother's last voice, I couldn't bear that. I want to share it our last contacting that my mother told me, my mother's last voice on the WeChat program. My mother told me, son, take care of yourself, study well, and graduate good grade. Please use moisturizer for your face, as it is getting dry. I want to see you bright face. This is my mother's last voice. Then after the 2 days, I have lost contacting with them. I have lost touching with them. So everything is changed. But I just standing and standing. Then after the 2 years, anything is changed. It made my life upside down. It told me all my family members were detained. Today I'm speaking of not only for myself, not only for my family. Actually, in the Turkey, all single Uyghur students face the same situation, lost their family members, not only me. Many Uyghur students, just because of the study in Turkey, living in Turkey, business in Turkey, all their family members come to Turkey, visiting Turkey. Just simple. The reason is just simple. Study in foreign countries is our human right, our basic right. Mother law is our basic right. Family law is our basic law. But in China, even this basic right, we don't have. Today we lost our whole right, whole human right. Today is a International Human Rights Day, but we don't have a right. I don't have a right. I couldn't contact with my family. I couldn't contact with my friends in my homeland. I don't have a right. I couldn't hearing my mother's voice. And my mother still in the prison camps. I don't know my father and my brother and my grandmother's situation. My grandmother still alive or died, I don't know. In the 2020, in the 21st century, and and more powerful century. Technology is more powerful. As a technology more powerful country citizen, I'm still Chinese citizen. I couldn't contact with my family. We don't have a right, but we need our right. We have to have our right. We are fighting for our right. Not only me, not only Akida, not only Ziba. Many Uyghur in diaspora, they lost contacting with their family, they lost their family members, they lost their children, they lost their parents, they lost their friends. Not only us. Today, more than 3 million Uyghur detained to the concentration camps. Today, we need help. We need help. World must help us. International community, international organization must helping us. Today, you helping us, you standing us not only for helping us, also you helping yourself, you helping your future, your generation future. If today you don't against the China authority, you don't stand up with vigor, maybe tomorrow, other part of the earth, other part of world, other dictator will do same thing, will follow in China, will do same thing. Maybe other minority, other ethnic group will face same thing. I just want to ask in Chinese authority, it came to Turkey, is considering crime. Why doesn't the China persecute of millions of Han people who come to Turkey every day? Millions of Han people come to Turkey for visiting every day. Why wouldn't you detain them? The China Constitution said equality among all ethnic groups. Where is the equality? Chinese Han people can come to abroad, can come to other country for visiting, for studying. It's no problem. But today, Uyghur people couldn't come to other country, couldn't come to Turkey, couldn't go abroad. They don't have a traveler right. They don't have a passport. If they get a passport, that's considered crime. If they go to another country, that's considered crime. If they have a relative, they have a friend, they have children in other country, that's considered crime. The Chinese authority always said there is anti-terrorism issue, anti-separatism issue in Xinjiang. But we said there's no so-called anti-separatism, anti-terrorism issue. Actually, there is a separatism, terrorism issue committed by Chinese authority, by Chinese regime. By asking the world, helping us save our mothers, our family, our people, our relative. Thank you.
Oh, I'm muted. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing today, Jewlan. Your story, painful as it may be, it is very important for us to hear these. For our final panelist today, I welcome a dear friend, and someone who has been struggling, like our other panelists, for a very long time to be rightfully reunited with a loved one. Let's welcome Ziba Murat. Ziba, you're muted. While we work on getting her microphone issue sorted, we welcome audience members to submit any questions that you have for our panelists in the chat box.
Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, yes, there we go.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for all joining us here today on the Human Rights Day in support of my dear friend Akida and her mother. Akida and I are in a common struggle, representative of the experience of millions, and we are those who have decided to speak out as the only hope for saving our loved ones as our struggle has stretched into multiple years of battle for the human dignity that our mothers deserve. My mother, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, a retired medical doctor, was taken from her home to the concentration camp by the Chinese police on September 11, 2018. To this day, we have no information whatsoever on why she's detained, her whereabouts, or her condition. She's being used as a collateral to punish us, the ones who dare to speak the truth. A non-political individual, speaks fluent Chinese, and has always lived a quiet life, but with care for her community. She retired early because of her poor health, and for the past 2 years, she has been in detention, with no visitors allowing and having no access to lawyers. Just imagine being locked away for no reason without anyone coming to see you for more than 2 years. The hardest part of this lonely situation is seeing that so many people still have no idea what's going on. I'm dealing with circumstances that most people cannot even imagine. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and it's incredibly painful to be unable to focus on what I should be a happy time in life because I'm still trying every moment of the day to receive some news of my mother, to fight to free her. I never wanted this, and I have spent the past 2 years in agony I can't even articulate. Every day I'm left with wondering where she is being held, if her delicate health is being taken care of, if she is mentally strong without contact for 2 years. As more and more news leaks about the concentration camp, our nightmares grows. Uyghurs are being enslaved in factories across China as we speak. Families are forcibly separated. Kids are in orphanages. So many innocent people are being sent to concentration camp while the world is ideal, making me realize the grim reality of how powerful this evil we are fighting against. My daughter was 3 months old when my mom was taken. And since that day, instead of feeding my baby, cuddling with her, I looked for my mother. I sought answers about her whereabouts and what had happened to her. Now my daughter's 2, and instead of reading her or taking her to parks, I found myself walking in the halls of Congress, seeking for help, searching for answer. I would not wish this on my worst enemy. We are tormented by the lack of news and inability to hear her voice. The fact that this is continuing in the modern day of age is horrifying. And the worst part of my mother's wrongful detainment is that seeing the conversation surrounding China continued with no mention of the names of those who are wrongfully detained. In any dialogue with China moving forward, the missing Uyghurs should be central of any conversation. The new administration must keep this in mind. Each and every Uyghur, whether living in our home or abroad, is under constant pressure, feeling that Our every move may condemn our loved ones to death or a fate worse than death. My mom's case is just the tip of the iceberg. As millions of others suffer similarly, it's clear that action at the current time is crucial. My mother's case serves as an example of a litmus test that should be applied regarding to the Chinese government. It's one that clearly demonstrates the Chinese government's refusal to participate in a genuine dialogue. While the Chinese authorities have moved away from their harsher diplomatic style in the past few months, and now give a lip service to a need for a dialogue with the United States, transparency and regard for human rights needed to be part of such conversation does not exist. If the Chinese government wants to clear their names, they must answer families like me about why we cannot communicate with our families. They must answer for running a brutal concentration camp in the 21st century. They must answer why the children and grandchildren are living lives of torment without the parents and grandparents. They must answer for this genocide. I wanted to close today with a sincere plea. Today, on a Human Rights Day, please recognize that if a scholar who contributed so much, like Rahile Dawut, can be targeted, if my mother, a peaceful retired medical doctor, can be taken, when we have a truth about the CCP's genocide of Uyghurs, the entire community, entire world must scream for justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ziba, for your remarks and for that call to action today on Human Rights Day, as she said, that the entire world would scream for justice. It is our hope that this panel today serves to remind of the need for everyone to commit to that. I would like to close our panel today by inviting our Campaign for Uyghurs Program Director, Babur, to give us some closing remarks. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Babur. I am the new program director at the Campaign for Uyghurs. I want to thank our panelists for being a part of this webinar and for sharing their stories and experiences and expertise. What has happened to the Uyghur people in East Turkestan is a human rights atrocity, and the effects of which can be seen here today. 3 individuals who have lost contact with their family and are desperately searching for an answer. Countless more who are looking for friends and family. This is a common experience of the Uyghur people in the diaspora. To not know is to be Uyghur, almost. Rahile Dawut's disappearance is a hallmark of the Chinese regime's action in East Turkestan, targeting academics, intellectuals, and cultural figures who are the keepers of knowledge and culture, is a statement of intent to erase that culture. The Uyghur culture and people are under threat today from a genocide orchestrated by the CCP. The story of Surya Tursun is not an uncommon one to hear, and we can clearly see the effect it has on those left in the dark outside of home. The world at large must recognize the atrocities being committed against the Uyghur people and work to reunite families and to restore freedom for all Uyghurs. And Gulshan Abbas, the target of retaliation after Roshan Abbas, the founder of Campaign for Uyghurs, spoke out against the mass detention of Uyghurs in 2018, shows the brutal tactics of repression and fear that the regime employs to silence its dissidents and carry out its plans in quiet. We as a free world cannot allow bullies to abuse the system or silence its critics. Campaign for Uyghurs has and will continue to work to ensure Uyghurs are free and that the Uyghur genocide is stopped, alongside our many allies. We will continue to support Uyghurs who are suffering and help them find their voice. I commend all of you today for your courage in speaking out and sharing your story, sharing your experience. Thank you again to all our panelists, and thank you to our attendees who took the time to listen to their stories, their expertise, and their insight.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. As an FYI, as we close today, this recording will be available on the Campaign for Uyghurs YouTube channel at the end of today, so you can share that link with anyone who might be interested.